Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Certainly glad to be joined today by members of our cabinet and the people that really have put together the ideas that we talked about last night. You're not going to have good things happen in the state of Rhode Island without good people that are leading the charge. So happy to be here. And Pastor Chris is also here. He's a deputy chief of staff and handles climate and energy issues in my office. So thank you for being here, Chris, as well. And thank you for your work, along with DM Director Terry Gray, our Office of Energy Resource Commissioner Nick Ucci, as well as Commerce Secretary Stephen Pryor and our Director of DOT, Peter Alviti. So thank you so much. The cookies were good, Peter. The other day you brought them by my house. That was good. Talking about exactly what we're talking about today, so it's good. I'm also joined by our OMB Director, Brian Daniels, who will be getting to know you quite well tomorrow and new days in terms of talking about the budget and the structures around our request to the General Assembly for consideration. Last night during my State of the State, I talked about the historic opportunity that lies in front of us, the once-in-a-lifetime chance we have to strengthen Rhode Island's economy and propel our state into the next generation, the next decade, with strength. I spoke to Rhode Islanders about the opportunity we have when it comes to housing, making Rhode Island an affordable place to live for all our people. I spoke about the opportunity we have around changing our business climate and making Rhode Island a more small business-friendly state. And tomorrow, as you know, I'll submit my budget, the administration's budget, a budget that's fiscally responsible and with no broad-based tax increases, but at the same time proposing long-term investments to grow our economy and to support the people of the state of Rhode Island. Today, I'm excited to share that the budget I'll propose to the General Assembly tomorrow will include more than $150 million to tackle climate change. The budget will fund a series of proposals that will not only reduce harmful greenhouse gases and build more resilient communities, but it will also invigorate our economy by creating good-paying jobs. Again, one of our major goals is to increase per capita income in the state of Rhode Island. My budget will also propose $60 million to improve infrastructure at the Port of Davisville. As offshore wind developers pursue federal permits for construction of the New England coast, this investment will power construction of a Terminal 5 pier and completion of required dredging preparation for about 34 acres to accommodate additional cargo laydown. I'm also proposing $35 million for the City of East Providence's proposed improvements to the South Key Marine Terminal, which will create a large, integrated, and centralized hub of intermodal shipping designed to support the offshore wind industry. My budget will also include $23 million in federal and state funding to expand Rhode Island's network of electric vehicle charging stations. I am also proposing $6 million to the Executive Change Coordinating Council to support advancement of the Act on Climate and the mandates that were in the Act on Climate. And I've directed the EC4 to create an Environmental Justice Committee which will solely focus on the issues that have impacted the most vulnerable residents for decades. So I'm asking Director Gray to come on up. I'm going to ask Director Gray to come up, Commissioner Ucci to come up and talk about our climate proposal, including the green bond that we will be proposing. And after that, I'll get back and share some exciting news related to our roads, bridges, and bike paths with our Director of DOT. So come on up. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Gray. I'm the Acting Director for the Rhode Island DEM, and I also have the opportunity to chair the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, which is essentially a climate cabinet of all of us that work under the governor's leadership. The $150 million in the FY23 budget for climate change-related projects is unprecedented, and it gives us an unbelievable opportunity to really start to make forward progress to implement the Act on Climate. As many of you know, the legislature passed the Act on Climate. Governor McKee signed it in April. It is a very aggressive and historic piece of legislation that's going to drive us to become a leader in responding to climate change. And these investments will give us the tools to really make that happen. Just highlighting three things, I'd like to just repeat what the governor said. There's $6 million in funding that's allocated directly to the EC4. This is the first time that money has been allocated to the Climate Council to actually do the work that we're charged with. It's very important. There's a lot of important activities that need to go on, a lot of responsibilities on the EC4, and this really gives us a little horsepower to get that done. There's also a really great set of investments that are in the green bond, and you'll see more about this tomorrow. It's not the only things that are in the green bond, but the three climate-related investments are support for the municipal resiliency programs. Our cities and towns have to get ready for the changes that are coming our way through sea level rise and more severe storms, and this provides support for them to do a lot of resiliency projects in their jurisdictions. We'll be working with the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank for implementation of that. There's also funding for a small business assistance loan program, also through the Infrastructure Bank, to help small businesses get ready for climate change. And one that's near and dear to my heart is an investment in forest conservation. We have to look at the forest that we have here in Rhode Island, the development pressures that are going on those forests, and really look at protecting that, and also increasing the tree cover in some of our urban communities. So we're really excited about the whole package, but I wanted to highlight these pieces for you this afternoon, and then I'll turn it over to Commissioner Ucci for some of the other elements here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Good to be here with you, Governor, and in this beautiful room in particular. There should be no doubt that climate change is real. 2021 marked the 45th consecutive year with global temperatures rising above the 20th century average. The years 2013 to 2021 all rank among the top 10 warmest years on record. These changes are leading to warming oceans and more intense weather patterns, all of which have implications for our citizens, our communities, our public health, and our economy. But there should also be no doubt about Rhode Island's and the governor's commitment to tackling the myriad of challenges posed by climate change while simultaneously seizing the moment to grow good-paying jobs and create vibrant economic growth opportunities. And the governor's budget advances this work in earnest. Today, you've heard, we are announcing a proposed $37 million in federal funds to create a high-efficiency electric heat pump incentive program to target greenhouse gas emission reductions in the heating sector. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with those, what an air source heat pump is, it can provide very efficient heating and cooling for a home or business by transferring heat rather than burning a fossil fuel to combust and provide heating only. And because these units run on electricity, we can reduce the environmental impacts from heating through the further integration of carbon-free renewable generation sources. Now, as part of this effort, we intend to assist homeowners and small to mid-sized business owners with the purchase and installation of this technology, with an emphasis on supporting families in environmental justice communities and community organizations. Also, the governor has included $23 million in federal funds to support the expansion of electric vehicle charging infrastructure across Rhode Island. Now, this suite of initiatives is targeting two particular sectors of our economy, heating and transportation, that currently make up 2/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions today, while improving access to more sustainable energy alternatives throughout the Ocean State. In addition, as you've heard, the budget includes $6 million annually to support climate change mitigation strategies and investments directed by the state's Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, or EC4, and tens of millions of dollars for port infrastructure, supporting our leadership position as the nation's offshore wind hub. Importantly, these efforts will not require general revenue. Our agencies are excited to get to work, and these measures will support Rhode Island's pathway toward a clean, affordable, reliable, and more equitable energy future. So thank you again for your leadership, Governor. I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, that's great news. Nick, thank you so much for your leadership as well. We'll transition as well to keep this rolling, and then we'll open up the questions, but we're going to talk about DOT news now. So last night during the State of the State, I also announced, thanks to a bipartisan infrastructure law and to our congressional delegation, we're ensured we get our fair share of the funds coming from D.C. We're able to accelerate over 100 infrastructure projects valued at over $2.1 billion. This critical investment focuses on key infrastructure priorities, including fixing bridges in need of critical repair, reducing carbon emissions, increasing system resilience, and removing barriers to connecting communities. Said simply, fixing these roads and bridges more quickly means safer roads, reduced travel time to and from work, and less needed car repairs. I'm going to ask Director Avila to talk about the accelerated plan, but I do want to highlight that the project list today, what the project list today includes. 22 projects with bike path infrastructure improvements, 63 projects that include pedestrian walkway features, 87 projects that will enhance stormwater quality, 86 projects that make roads and walkways safer, and all of these projects create good-paying jobs as we continue our efforts to increase per capita income in the state of Rhode Island. So, Peter, you're going to be busy. Your department's going to be busy. I think you're up to the task, but tell us how you're going to make all that happen. That's a lot of projects.
Thanks, Governor. You know, I've got to begin by thanking a few people for providing this extraordinary amount of generational investment in our infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure in the state. The President and the Secretary of U.S. DOT implemented a bipartisan Infrastructure and Jobs Act that, with the support of our congressional delegation, very key support to move this through the Senate and Congress, Senator Reed's, Senator Whitehouse, certainly Congressman Langevin and Cicilline, all put their shoulder into it in Congress to make sure this thing moved through so these funds would get here to Rhode Island. But just as importantly, the governor is putting his shoulder into providing the state share of that funding. That makes it possible for us to unlock and use this several $100 million worth of additional investment. And the Senate President, Ruggiero, and the House Speaker, Shekarchi, are also very supportive of all of this. Without that kind of support, this money would not be available, and the benefits that I'm about to speak about would not be happening here in Rhode Island. As the governor said, this year we're infusing an additional, over the next 5 years, an additional, over and above our normal and customary transportation funding here in the state, an additional $576 million over 5 years. That is going to take, out of the 10-year plan that we have of about 600 projects, and move over 100 of them up in time, an average of 4 years, some as much as 10 years. And they're valued at about $2.1 billion. So we're leveraging the $576 million to positively affect and accelerate over $2 billion worth of projects that are on our 10-year plan. Simply put, this is going to make Rhode Island's roads and bridges and other transportation infrastructure safer and in a better state of repair more quickly than we would have been able to realize otherwise. And we're going to do that with a top-of-the-mind awareness on how our construction projects benefit not only the state but also the planet by designing these projects and funding them in a way that will contribute to achieving our climate change initiatives here in the state and goals. Because in the past several years, we have concentrated our roadworks initiative mainly on the state of good repair of our bridges, our deficient bridges, where we started out with over 25% structurally deficient bridges. We're moving quickly to eliminate those hazards from our lives. This will be bringing Rhode Island's roads and bridges into a state of good repair. And in doing that, we'll also do it in a way that we enhance our alternative and active transportation modes. We bring to a state of good repair our environmental systems, our stormwater systems in the state. We include ADA and pedestrian improvements to the infrastructure that we'll be building with this money that will make a better quality of life and a better environment for the residents of the state. Wherever possible, we cut down on the footprint of our bridges, as we have on projects like the Henderson Bridge. We'll be carrying that thought farther and doubling down on it with our new projects. We'll be reducing the maintenance costs and reduce the carbon footprint that results from these transportation assets in the future. We've done things in the past several years that help us in those initiatives, like the ferry service to Newport that we started that actually reduces considerably the amount of congestion and traffic and vehicles in the city of Newport, particularly in the summertime. We're now will be using these new funds to double down and renew and strengthen our commitment to improve not only the condition of our roads and bridges, but also their resiliency. We're making a commitment in these projects to enhance, as I said, alternate modes of transportation and carbon reduction initiatives. We are going to be more mindful to the effect of the environment and do our best to reduce emissions wherever and whenever we can with this funding. RIDOT certainly supports the governor's commitment that you heard him make earlier to mitigating climate change, and the United States Department of Transportation have included in this legislation, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, an emphasis on climate change and equity. And with that, our planners and our staff went to work and created this accelerated plan that will enhance many of our projects using this initiative principles. We'll create new infrastructure that's less vulnerable and more resilient to changing climate. And for several years now, while we've been planning our road improvements with rising sea levels, and we'll certainly double down and continue that commitment with this funding. We've embraced and will continue to advance new technologies like electric vehicle charging stations that $23 million of this funding is for, and broadband development in our transportation right-of-ways so that we could provide better broadband service to communities. The projects also include provisions for reconnecting communities and for addressing equity issues. Both will be a vital part going forward of our planning strategies. All of this support will validate our commitment to use these federal funds in the most efficient and effective way in conformance with these federal policies, and certainly in association with the bipartisan Infrastructure and Jobs Act. Our mandate from the governor is to restore Rhode Island's infrastructure to a state of good repair and create jobs while we create a pathway to Rhode Island's greener future. Thanks for your support, Governor. Thank you to the support of the General Assembly as we move forward. And we're looking forward. These are projects that will begin putting in the ground and putting the shovel in the ground on this year. We were particularly ready for it because of the structure of our 10-year plan and the planning process and the management structure that we now have at DOT that will get this money to work for you quickly and efficiently. So thanks.
Peter, that's great. And you'll be busy, and we like that. And we also know that that it's important to all our families, this effort. But it's also, as I mentioned last night, it's time that we really improve our small business-friendly climate. And we know that that's part of the metrics, right? I can't imagine why we're not moving up on the infrastructure piece of some of those ratings, but I think that the Secretary Pryor has got his office working on that and making sure that everybody in the world that talks about Rhode Island in that way and infrastructure understands that there's been a tremendous amount of work that has happened over the last few years, and we're going to double down and be able to accelerate that, like you said. So that's going to be important for us. I'd like to have Stephen Pryor just come up and say a few words about some of the wind investments we're making, and then we can open it up unless Pastor Chris wants to give us any guidance, right? But we'll go with the Secretary Pryor right now.
Well, all of this is music to a commerce guy's ears. And Governor, directors, commissioner, pastor, thank you very, very much for this forward motion. These are essential investments for our environment, for our people, for our economy. And we're very proud to work as a team towards these collective goals, mutually reinforcing, complementary goals. What an exciting set of investments these are. Among them, you've already heard today, thanks to this governor, $95 million of investments in 2 ports, one at Quonset for improvement, 2 in East Providence for new construction, nearly $100 million of investments in service of our green and blue economies, and in particular in service of our offshore wind industry. Rhode Island has given birth to the offshore wind industry here in the United States. We have built its first offshore wind farm, of course. We certainly hope and believe it's not our last. And there's more and more evidence that it's not even close to being the end point. The Biden administration in the spring of 2021, issued some predictions and spoke of investing some $12 billion per year capital investment in projects on both U.S. coasts for offshore wind and related activities, producing 30 gigawatts of power by 2030. As a point of reference, our Revolution Wind project will produce 400 megawatts. The United States is thinking big. It all starts here in Rhode Island. We want to make sure that under this governor, in partnership with this General Assembly, Rhode Island continues to capitalize upon this momentum in the offshore wind industry. The Biden administration estimates that these gigawatts of power, the investments related to them, will result in 44,000 workers employed directly in offshore wind by 2030, and an additional 33,000 workers in the communities that support these activities, 77,000 jobs in the United States related. We want to ensure that Rhode Island gets its fair share, revision, better than our fair share of those jobs. Doing so means that we need to create the platforms with which to deploy these turbines. We need to help in the fabrication of them, the assembly of them, and indeed the deployment of them. In order to do so, all of the developers involved, all of the corporate entities and investors involved speak of waterfront property. It's all about having ports and port access for the purpose of deploying during the period I just described, the fabrication through to the deployment, and then for operations and management of those, operations and maintenance of those turbines as well, all the way through to the O&M activity. So we are so blessed that in these two instances, we have ports being renovated and ports being built anew to support this industry. The governor would be disappointed if we didn't remind you exactly why this matters. Rhode Island continues to, as it has for months, lead the Northeast in our economic recovery coming out of the COVID downturn. On key indicators, we're at the top of the list in the Northeast region for the strength of our economic recovery. We cannot rest on our laurels. We need to build on our strengths, including the green and blue economies, to propel ourselves into 2030 and beyond. Governor and colleagues, thank you so very much.
Governor, how much of a green bond are you asking for in your budget? What's that bond going to amount to? And how does your program that you're outlining today differ from, and is it better than, the Transportation Climate Initiative that you turned thumbs down on a couple of months ago?
I don't think the state hasn't turned its thumb about the TCI you're talking about? You know, that was Massachusetts and Connecticut decided to take a pass on that, right? So we certainly were prepared to move forward on that, but in some way. But I believe it's about $38 million, Brian? That's in the bond relative to the green energy, right? So, which. No, I think a piece of what Commissioner Ucci was talking about is going to help offset that if we're able to use that $6 million of funding that we believe could be better appropriated in that direction to continue with that. But I believe that the TCI was projecting about $19 million a year. So I think we're going to have to make sure that we want to keep pace with that we're going to have to find a way to grow our way towards that number.
All right, we've got Brian over here.
Governor, a lot of this funding, $150 million, coming from one-time federal sources. ARPA is sort of this once-in-a-lifetime thing, and you're not using general revenues for any of this. Do you think there's a point in the future, given that climate change is only going to increase, where we're going to have to use some general revenues, and why not start now?
Yeah, so right now you're going to spend what's available and make it work to the best of our ability, leverage that as far as we can, and then let's see where we end up. Well said. Good.
In your speech, you spoke a lot about housing. Is this going to be like a linchpin of your administration going into this legislative session? And I'm sure you were working with Speaker Shekarchi on this as well, since it's a big push for him.
I think the Speaker and I are very much aligned with working on a strategy in all 39 cities and towns that address housing, as I would say, from homelessness right to fair market value and everything in between. So I think it is an important piece. That's one of the reasons why we appropriated the largest amount of dollars in the APRA funding, the federal dollars, that $1.1 billion.
All right, back here to Pat.
Governor, and I'm reading from the press release that you distributed. According to this, you're going to be directing the EC4, the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, to create an environmental justice committee which will solely focus on the issues that have impacted the most vulnerable residents for decades. Perhaps you could explain that in more detail. What type of due process? Is that going to be criminal-based, or is that what type of powers in terms of enforcement are going to be incorporated into a relatively nebulous description?
Well, I don't know who takes that. I'll let this side of the team. But the idea, obviously, is spelled out that we believe that in all areas that equity and talking about the people who might be most impacted on any issue, and in this case, climate is addressed, and that's the reason putting the committee together. But Director, Terry, you might want to come to the mic, though.
Thank you. Thank you for the question on the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee that was discussed last night. It's in the press release as well. We, as an EC4, will be working to pull that together at the governor's direction. What we really want is feedback. We want input. We want to understand that we are taking strategies and taking actions that benefit all Rhode Islanders, and not just the people that show up at our typical meetings. So we want to make sure we're reaching out into all the communities. Now, you mentioned enforcement, and enforcement isn't something that's tasked to the EC4. It's typically tasked to the agencies that are part of the EC4. So, for instance, I'm the director of DEM. We have certain enforcement authorities for things like clean air. When topics come before the EC4, from environmental justice groups or from other community representatives that indicate that there's a problem there, then the individual agencies within the EC4 will use their respective authorities to take those on.
Just a quick follow-up. That's exactly what it could be concerning to people, that in fact the DEM will be able to expand its rather broad enforcement technique, if you will, powers into areas that are more of a social justice issue, perhaps more the purview of the Attorney General's office. Thank you.
I think environmental justice is something that we all have to focus on. It's clearly an issue for DEM. It's an important issue. The governor's direction really focuses on climate justice, which has a huge amount of overlap with environmental justice. A lot of the things are the same. We do work with the Attorney General's office on these things, and it's a coordinating council, right? So we are looking across the whole of state government to make sure we're coordinated on our approaches. And with this particular new direction from Governor McKee, we're going to make sure that we're getting the input from communities that have traditionally not been represented well in our discussions.
Oh, thank you. Hi, I'm Governor McKee. Just a question. Last night you spoke about housing, and I know that you mentioned down payments for some Rhode Islanders and how that would be something that the state would be able to assist with. Do we know what some of the qualifications would be for that? I know that that's a barrier that some have faced.
I mean, the concept is one that certainly more familiar than the details, right? The idea is that, and other states have programs like this, which I think are really helpful, where they're able to determine who can qualify based on some levels of income. Some people do it based on community. So I'm not sure of the details at the moment on it, but the idea clearly is to create more home ownership to people who are qualified to take out loans, but they need help on that down payment to actually get into home ownership. And as I've said, Rhode Island is, has one of the lowest home ownership percentages in the country. And that's a path to building generational wealth. There's no question about that. We all know that if we own a home long enough and we're able to keep it, we're going to gain a certain amount of equity, and that's really important. I tell you, I coached two young kids, and now they're raising their family. And one of them, they're twins. One of them actually bought a home about 6 or 7 years ago, and coming from which we would consider a family that certainly had, was challenged, right? So, and then just sold that home and built up an equity there well over $100,000. And now that they actually bought a home in my hometown. The twin brother just was able to purchase a house. So, you know, that equity that was developed there is so critical to all our communities. So that's the idea. The idea is to let people have an opportunity that can't afford the mortgage to get the down payment, and then we'll get the details to you. You know, I think they're coming out tomorrow or something like that, right? So I guess I'm not allowed to give the total details, but I give the concept there, and I tell you what a difference it made for homeownership for that young man that I coached to have that house for that many years. And his brother now is just getting involved in home ownership, and look at the difference there. Now both of them are going to build some level of equity for their families long term. It's a game changer in most cases. Yeah.
Got it. Governor or Secretary Pryor, one or the other of you, you're talking about building facilities to do staging for wind and offshore projects. Aren't they building that in New Bedford already? I mean, is there a competition here, or is there enough capacity for something here and there?
Yeah, good question. It's estimated that even if we see full build-outs in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and in New London, Connecticut, and if you include the ports in Rhode Island that are already actively in support of the offshore wind industry, Quonset and Provport, we will have an insufficient amount of port land and port activity to support the trajectory of northeastern offshore wind-related development. So we don't have enough port facilities, even with the new stuff coming online. So we're very pleased. There have been numerous empirical estimates around this. So we're very pleased that Rhode Island is getting to the act even more than our neighbors, building an altogether new port and enhancing the ones we have, because we're going to need it.
Last one back here.
This one's for the governor. Follow-up on housing. Is Rhode Island Housing going to be contributing to the new measures you're pushing forward in these coming legislative year? Like, RI Housing has done a lot of work with, you know, getting first-time home buyers. I know they're a private organization, but are you going to take any of their input, or do they have any say in this?
Of course. And you know, I think one of my last lines of the talk was, I'll work with anybody who's doing the work. Rhode Island Housing is doing the work in many ways right now on especially COVID-related areas with the rent relief strategies, and also the new mortgage strategies that are coming out in terms of those federal dollars. So we intend to work with the people who are doing the work on the ground, and anywhere where people are doing that hard work, we're going to bring them into this mix, because it's going to take an all hands on deck approach to make sure that, you know, as we lay out the plan, and that was one of the asks in our plan in terms of request for dollars, was to create, and it was a kind of Rhode Island Foundation's suggestion, which I shared, was actually get a plan. So the first step on that is going to get a plan, and we're going to have to talk to everybody that is really interested in this, you know, this effort, including Rhode Island Housing. Okay. Thank you.